My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I was crouched in the back corner of our master bedroom closet, wedged between Michael's winter coats and a stack of old storage bins, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The surprise party was supposed to happen in exactly 4 minutes. Our friends were already parked on the street outside, waiting for my signal. I had orchestrated everything for weeks: the catering, the decorations downstairs, even convinced his mother to keep the kids at her place for the evening. Michael was supposed to walk through that front door any second now, completely unsuspecting, and I was going to jump out and yell, "Surprise!" like we were 25 again. But that's when I heard his truck pull into the driveway, and then I heard a second car. The garage door rumbled open, and I pressed myself deeper into the darkness of the closet, listening to the familiar sound of Michael's footsteps on the stairs. But there was another set of footsteps with him. A woman's voice laughed, high-pitched, familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. It couldn't be. Not her. Not tonight of all nights. "Jesus, Michael, this house is incredible," the woman said, and I felt the air leave my lungs completely. I knew that voice. I'd been hearing it for 3 years. Let me back up. 3 years earlier, everything felt perfect in a way that only happens when you're not paying close enough attention to notice the cracks forming. We'd bought the house in Riverside Estates 8 years ago, back when Michael was still climbing the ladder at Henderson and Associates, the commercial real estate firm where he'd worked since his 20s. We were a golden couple in our suburban neighborhood, both 36, both successful, both still madly in love, or so I thought. Michael pulled in 6 figures. I ran a boutique marketing firm from my home office. We had 2 kids, Emma and Tyler, ages 9 and 6. We hosted the annual 4th of July block party. We donated to the school fundraiser. We had the kind of life that looked like a furniture catalog photograph. Our bedroom was on the 2nd floor, the master suite with the walk-in closet I'd renovated 2 years ago. The closet was my sanctuary: marble countertops, custom lighting, organization systems that would make Marie Kondo weep. Michael always joked that I spent more time in there getting ready than anywhere else in the house. He wasn't wrong. That closet was where I got my armor on each morning before facing the world. The house itself was gorgeous: 2 stories, a wraparound porch, a 3-car garage, and a backyard that overlooked the golf course. We'd paid $875,000 for it. Our mortgage was substantial, but Michael's income had always made it feel manageable. He made partner at Henderson and Associates 3 years ago, and that partnership agreement came with a significant bump in salary. That was around the time I first met Jennifer. Jennifer was his new assistant. She was 28, blonde, with the kind of effortless beauty that didn't require the 2-hour morning routine I needed. She dressed in clothes that looked casual, but probably cost more than my grocery budget. She had a laugh that filled an entire room, and she started coming to our annual 4th of July party. "She's great, right?" Michael had asked that first summer as we were cleaning up after the party. Jennifer had helped coordinate the games for the kids, had made everyone feel welcomed, had somehow made herself indispensable in the span of an afternoon. "I'm lucky to have her at the office." "She seems nice," I'd said, which was the truth. She was nice. She was also exactly the kind of woman I used to be, before marriage and motherhood, and the slow accumulation of responsibilities had worn away the sharp edges of my youth. But I trusted Michael. We'd been married for 12 years. We had history. We had a foundation that felt solid, or at least, I thought we did. The promotion came with new responsibilities. Michael started staying late at the office more frequently. There were development meetings in Denver, conference calls that stretched into the evening, strategic planning sessions that required his full attention. It was the cost of the partnership, he explained. It was what he'd been working toward his entire career. I understood. I supported him. "You're going to do amazing things," I'd told him the night he made partner, kissing him while Emma and Tyler were already asleep upstairs. He had looked at me with something that might have been guilt in his eyes, or maybe I was just reading things into it now, looking back with the awful clarity of hindsight. I started noticing small things. His phone would buzz, and he'd glance at it quickly, then flip it face down. He'd take calls in his truck instead of inside the house. He came home smelling like a cologne that wasn't the one I'd bought him for his birthday. These were tiny details, the kind that wouldn't register on anyone else's radar. But I'm detail-oriented by nature. It's what made me good at my job. It's also what made me paranoid. "Is everything okay?" I'd asked him one Tuesday evening after he'd spent 40 minutes on a call in the garage. "Fine, honey, just work stuff. Nothing to worry about," he'd said, kissing the top of my head in that way that used to feel intimate, but lately felt distracted. I wanted to believe him, so I did. My mother had warned me to be careful. "Men change when they get that kind of power," she'd said, when I mentioned that Michael had been working late. She'd said it gently, but the implication was clear. I should be paying attention. "Michael's not like that," I defended him, maybe a little too forcefully. "But here's the thing about your marriage. Once you start wondering if your husband is being unfaithful, you can't stop wondering. It becomes this constant background noise in your head. You scrutinize every interaction, every text message, every delayed arrival home. You become a detective in your own life, gathering evidence that you're not sure you want to find." 3 months ago, I'd hired a private investigator. I didn't tell anyone. I was ashamed of myself for even considering it, but I was more ashamed of the alternative, which was to keep living in this fog of uncertainty. The investigator's report came back clean. Michael was exactly where he said he was. The late office nights were real. The Denver conferences were documented. There was no second phone, no secret hotel reservations, no incriminating text messages. The investigator had done his job thoroughly. Michael appeared to be faithful. I'd felt like an idiot. I'd also felt relieved and guilty in equal measure for doubting him. So I'd decided to do something nice, something that would remind us both of why we'd fallen in love in the first place. I'd planned this surprise party, his 45th birthday, catered by his favorite Italian restaurant, all his friends from the office and the neighborhood, even his mother making his favorite lasagna. I was going to make him feel celebrated and loved and wanted. I was going to prove to myself that everything was fine. And now, I was crouched in my closet, listening to my husband and Jennifer walk through our bedroom, and I realized that maybe I hadn't been paranoid enough. They didn't turn on the overhead lights. They were moving in the semi-darkness, guided by the late afternoon sun filtering through the windows. I could see them through the crack in the closet door if I angled my head just right. Michael's hand was on Jennifer's lower back, a gesture so tender and familiar that I had to cover my mouth to keep from making a sound. "The kids aren't home?" Jennifer asked, her voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. "No, Ashley arranged for them to stay at her mother's place tonight," Michael said. My name in his mouth felt like a betrayal. "We have a few hours." And that's when I understood that the surprise party waiting outside was never going to happen. I couldn't breathe. My lungs had stopped working completely. I watched through the crack in the closet door as Michael's hand found the small of Jennifer's back, guiding her toward our bed. The bed where he'd slept next to me for 8 years, where we'd made love on our anniversary just 3 weeks ago, where I'd told him I loved him every single morning before he left for work. "I've been thinking about this for months," Jennifer whispered, and she reached up to kiss him. I pressed my fist against my mouth so hard I tasted blood. Every muscle in my body had gone rigid. The shock was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment I couldn't even register what was happening. This wasn't real. This was a nightmare. I would wake up in a few seconds and laugh at how paranoid I'd become. How ridiculous. How wrong. But then Michael was pulling her shirt over her head, and I realized with devastating clarity that this was exactly as real as it got. I don't remember making the decision to move. My body just reacted. I stumbled backward, crushing my shoulder against the closet door frame. The sound wasn't loud, just a soft thud, but it was enough. Michael's head snapped toward the closet. "What was that?" Jennifer asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. I had maybe 3 seconds before he discovered me. 3 seconds to decide who I wanted to be in this moment. I could stay hidden, let them finish, and deal with the fallout privately. I could slip out quietly and confront him later when we were alone. I could do 1,000 things that wouldn't involve the humiliation that was about to unfold. Instead, I yanked open the closet door and stepped into the bedroom light. Michael's face went absolutely white. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not guilt, fear. As if he'd been caught doing something so fundamentally wrong that he couldn't even begin to explain it. "Ashley," he said, and that single word contained everything. The lie, the betrayal, the end of our marriage. Jennifer screamed and grabbed for her clothes. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold them in front of her body. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Get out," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from someone else's body. "Both of you. Get out of my house, right now." "Honey, let me explain," Michael started, reaching for his pants, but I held up my hand. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare speak to me. Not now, not ever again without my lawyer present." The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him, but the moment they left my mouth, I knew they were the only words that mattered. Jennifer was already moving toward the door, her clothes bundled against her chest. She didn't meet my eyes. Michael tried to follow her, but I stepped directly into his path. "The kids," I said quietly. How long have you been doing this?" "Ashley, please." "How long?" He couldn't answer. The silence was answer enough. I walked downstairs on autopilot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the banister. Through the front window, I could see our friends still sitting in their cars, waiting for my signal, waiting for the surprise that was never going to happen. The caterers were probably already setting up in the kitchen, arranging trays of lasagna and antipasto on the dining room table. Someone had blown up a banner that said, "Happy 45th birthday, Michael," and hung it across the living room wall. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Catherine. We'd known each other since college. She picked up on the second ring. "Ash, are you ready? Everyone's waiting," she said. "Don't come in. Tell everyone the party's canceled. I'll explain later." "What? Why? Is Michael?" I hung up. I couldn't explain, couldn't form the words, couldn't make this real by saying it out loud. Michael and Jennifer came downstairs together, Jennifer's hair still wet from my shower, her makeup smudged. She looked like she'd been crying. Good. I hoped she'd been crying. "Leave," I said again, "and don't you ever come back to this house, not for anything." Michael tried to say something, but I was already walking into the kitchen. I locked myself in the pantry and slid down to the floor, my back against the shelves. I could hear them talking in hushed voices in the living room. I could hear Jennifer apologizing. I could hear Michael trying to explain to her that this was complicated, that he'd handle it, that I'd calm down once we all had time to process. The last part made me want to scream. He was still defending her, still treating her like she was someone worth protecting, still prioritizing her feelings over the fact that he'd just destroyed our family. I stayed in that pantry for 2 hours. I listened to them leave. I listened to Catherine calling me repeatedly. I listened to the caterers packing up their equipment and the decorators taking down the birthday banner. I listened to the sound of Michael's truck pulling out of the driveway, and then the silence that followed was somehow worse than anything that had come before. When I finally came out of the pantry, the house was empty and quiet. The lasagna was still on the dining room table, getting cold. The decorations were half taken down, creating this surreal landscape of half-finished celebration. I picked up one of the lasagna trays and threw it directly into the trash can. Then I called my divorce attorney. Robert Chen had been practicing family law for 23 years. His office was on the 15th floor of a downtown building, all glass and steel, and the kind of expensive minimalism that screamed, "I've won a lot of cases." He was 58, Asian American, with reading glasses on a chain, and the demeanor of someone who'd seen every variation of human betrayal at least 100 times. "Tell me everything," he said, after I'd explained the basic situation. "Don't leave anything out, not your feelings, the facts. I need facts." I told him about Jennifer, about the late nights at the office, about the cologne, about the phone calls in the garage, about hiring the private investigator and how she'd come back clean, about how I'd hidden in the closet. "You have a witness to the affair?" he asked. "I witnessed it. I was literally in the room." "That's perfect. Infidelity is still considered grounds for divorce in this state, and more importantly, It affects the division of assets and custody arrangements. Did he know you were there? No. I only revealed myself after they were already intimate. Okay, that's even better because it means you have credible testimony that he was knowingly engaging in infidelity while married. Now, we need to talk about your financial situation. This was the part that made me feel physically ill. Michael made nearly $200,000 a year. I made about $60,000 from my marketing firm, but most of that went back into the business. Our house was worth approximately $1.2 million at current market rates. We had about $400,000 in equity. He had a 401k with roughly $350,000 in it. There were investment accounts, the cars, the furniture, all of it accumulated during our marriage. As his spouse, you're entitled to 50% of all marital assets, Robert explained. The house is marital property. The 401k is marital property. The investment accounts are marital property. The only exception would be if there's a prenup, which I'm assuming you don't have. I shook my head. We'd been poor when we got married, both of us just starting out. Neither of us had anything worth protecting. The idea of a prenup had seemed insulting. Okay, so we're looking at you receiving approximately $900,000 to $1 million in the divorce settlement, plus child support for both children until they turn 18. With his income, that should be substantial. The real question is custody. Do you want primary custody of both children? Of course I do. Good, because with documented infidelity, especially an affair with a younger woman from his workplace, any judge is going to heavily favor you in a custody arrangement. He'll likely get visitation rights and be responsible for child support, but you'll have primary custody. It should have felt like a victory. In many ways, it was. But all I could think about was how my children were going to react when they found out their father had been cheating on their mother. How Emma would look at him differently. How Tyler would struggle to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. I need you to do something for me, Robert said. Document everything. Keep a journal of your interactions with Michael, particularly anything related to the children. Save all text messages and emails. If he contacts you, respond in writing only. No phone calls. We want a paper trail. And do not, under any circumstances, badmouth him to the children or allow them to know the details of his infidelity. I know it's tempting, but it will come back to haunt you in custody proceedings. I would never. I believe you, but people do strange things when they're hurt. Just be aware of that. I left Robert's office with a folder full of paperwork and a consultation bill for $800. The divorce was going to cost me somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 in legal fees, depending on how much Michael wanted to fight it. That was money I didn't have readily available. That was money I was going to have to take from my business reserves or borrow against the house. That was the first moment I realized that Michael's infidelity wasn't just going to cost me my marriage. It was going to cost me money, time, energy, and peace of mind for the next 2 to 3 years minimum. I drove to my mother's house to pick up the kids. I hadn't told her anything yet. I hadn't told anyone except Catherine, and I'd barely managed that through text messages. The story was too fresh, too raw, too humiliating to explain out loud. My mother took one look at my face and knew something was catastrophically wrong. "What happened?" she asked, pulling me into the kitchen while Emma and Tyler watched cartoons in the living room. "Michael's been having an affair with his assistant. I caught them today. I'm filing for divorce." My mother didn't say "I told you so," even though she'd warned me years ago about men with power and ambition. Instead, she just wrapped her arms around me and let me cry into her shoulder for the first time since I'd discovered the truth. "We're going to get through this," she said. "All of us. You're stronger than you think." I wasn't sure I believed her, but I held on to the words anyway. The next week was a blur of difficult conversations and harder decisions. I had to tell Emma and Tyler that their father and I were getting divorced. I kept it simple, age-appropriate, and completely free of any mention of Jennifer. I told them that sometimes people grow in different directions, that it wasn't their fault, that both of us loved them very much, and that would never change. Emma cried. Tyler asked if he could still go to soccer practice. "Children are resilient," everyone said. "Children are adaptable. Children will be fine." but I could see the confusion in their eyes, and I knew that fine was relative. Michael called me twice. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both times he left messages saying we needed to talk, that we needed to work this out, that he'd made a terrible mistake. I saved the voicemails and sent them to Robert. "Don't respond," Robert advised. "Let him stew, let him wonder. Once he realizes you're serious, he'll either fight you or accept the inevitable. Either way, we're in control of the narrative." But it was hard, so hard. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the humiliation and the shattering of every promise we'd ever made to each other, there was still a part of me that wanted to hear his explanation, that wanted him to grovel and apologize and promise it would never happen again, that wanted to believe we could somehow fix this. That part of me was a fool. 2 weeks after I caught them, Michael retained his own attorney. His name was Gerald Rothstein, and he had the reputation of being a shark. I knew this because Catherine texted me a news article about a custody case he'd won, where the mother lost primary custody, despite being the primary caregiver for 5 years. "Don't worry," Robert said when I showed him the article. "Rothstein plays dirty, but we have infidelity on our side. That's not something he can spin away." But I was worried. I was terrified. Because I realized that Michael, the man I'd been married to for 12 years, the father of my children, the person I'd built a life with, was now my adversary. And adversaries don't fight fair. The first bombshell came in a discovery document from Rothstein's office. Michael was claiming that he'd been unhappy in our marriage for years, that he'd tried to talk to me about it, but I was always too focused on my business or the house or the kids to listen to his needs. That Jennifer had been supportive during a difficult time, and yes, it had crossed a line, but the real problem was our relationship. Reading those words felt like being stabbed repeatedly. Had I really been that inattentive? Had I really missed that he was unhappy? Or was this just another lie, another way of absolving himself of responsibility? "This is standard deflection," Robert assured me. "He's trying to make this about your marriage being broken, not about his choice to cheat. Don't let it get to you." But it did get to me. It burrowed into my brain and set up camp, whispering that maybe this was my fault. Maybe I should have paid more attention. Maybe I should have been a better wife. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I called Jennifer. I got her number from Michael's old phone bill, a number I'd seen dozens of times but never had reason to examine until now. My heart was pounding as I dialed. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know if she'd even answer. But I needed to hear her voice. I needed to understand what was happening in her head. She picked up on the third ring. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, uncertain. "It's Ashley, Michael's wife." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "I don't think we should talk," she said finally. "I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because I need to understand something. Did you know he was married when you started this?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yes," she said quietly. I knew. The honesty was somehow worse than a lie would have been. "Why? How could you do that?" "Because I loved him," she said, and I heard actual tears in her voice. "I know that doesn't make it okay. I know it doesn't excuse anything. But I did. I do." "He used you," I said. "He told me that he'd been planning to leave me for months, that he was only staying for the kids. Do you really think he's going to leave them now? Do you really think he's going to blow up his entire family for you?" She didn't finish the sentence. I think she already knew the answer. "He's going to go back to his family, Jennifer. He's going to tell everyone this was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. You're going to be the girl he cheated with, and his wife is going to be the sympathetic one. His kids are going to hate you. His friends are going to despise you, and he's going to move on like you never existed." I hung up before she could respond. I don't know if that phone call accomplished anything except making me feel temporarily powerful, but it did accomplish one thing. It made me realize that Jennifer wasn't the real enemy. Michael was. 3 months into the divorce proceedings, Michael made his next move. He filed a motion requesting temporary custody of both children pending the final divorce decree. His argument was that I was using the children as a weapon, that I was alienating him from them, that I was unfit to be their primary caregiver. It was a nuclear option. It was also completely baseless, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that now we were in court, in front of a judge, and my parenting was on trial. Robert was furious. "This is retaliation," he said. "Pure retaliation, because you're standing firm on the divorce. Rothstein knows he doesn't have a legitimate case, so he's trying to intimidate you into settling." "Will it work?" I asked. "Not if we fight it, but we're going to need to be strategic." The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. That gave us time to prepare, to gather character witnesses, to document my fitness as a parent. It also gave me 6 weeks of absolute terror, waking up at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat, convinced that I was going to lose my children. I kept a journal, just like Robert had instructed. I documented every school pickup, every homework session, every bedtime story. I took pictures of Emma's soccer games and Tyler's science fair project. I filled a folder with report cards and teacher evaluations and emails from the school praising my involvement in the PTA. And I waited. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the empty space where the couch used to be. Michael had already moved out, taken his things, started his new life. The house felt cavernous without him, full of spaces where he used to be. At 6 in the morning, I got dressed in the navy suit I'd bought specifically for this hearing. I did my makeup carefully, applied my lipstick, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a woman fighting for her life. Because that's what this was. Not a legal proceeding, but a fight for survival. Robert met me at the courthouse. He was wearing an expensive gray suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. He looked calm, confident, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "Remember," he said as we climbed the courthouse steps, "let me do the talking. If the judge asks you a question, answer directly and honestly. Don't volunteer information. Don't get emotional. Let your documentation speak for itself." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Michael was already there, sitting with Gerald Rothstein. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept either. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something in his expression that might have been regret. Then he looked away. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Hutchins. She had steel gray hair and reading glasses, and an expression that suggested she'd seen every variation of this same case approximately 7,000 times. "This is a motion for temporary custody pending the final divorce decree," Judge Hutchins said, reviewing the paperwork. "Mr. Patterson, you're arguing that Mrs. Patterson is unfit to be the primary caregiver. Is that correct?" "That's correct, Your Honor," Rothstein said, standing. "My client's wife has been using the children as a weapon in the divorce proceedings. She's prevented him from having appropriate contact with them. She's poisoned their minds against him. In the best interest of the children, temporary custody should be awarded to my client." Every word was a lie. I wanted to stand up and scream that I'd never prevented Michael from seeing his children, that I'd never said a negative word about him to them, that I'd done everything in my power to protect their relationship with him. But Robert had told me to stay quiet. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Hutchins said, looking at me, "do you have a response?" I stood, my legs shaking slightly. "Your Honor, I've been the primary caregiver for both children since they were born. I coordinate their school schedules, their extracurricular activities, their medical appointments. I help with homework, attend all parent-teacher conferences, and maintain their social connections. I have not prevented my husband from seeing his children. In fact, I've encouraged their relationship. What I have done is filed for divorce because my husband committed infidelity. That is not a reflection on my parenting. That is a reflection on his choices as a husband." "Thank you," Judge Hutchins said. "I'd like to call some witnesses." What followed was the most validating and simultaneously humiliating experience of my life. Catherine testified about how involved I was in my children's lives. Mrs. Henderson, Emma's teacher, testified about my consistent presence at school events. Dr. Patel, the children's pediatrician, testified about how well-adjusted both children appeared to be and how involved I was in their health care. Then it was Michael's turn. He testified that he loved his children deeply, that he'd been a devoted father, that he wanted nothing more than to maintain a strong relationship with them. He said nothing about Jennifer. He said nothing about the affair. He just sat there and presented himself as a man who'd made some mistakes in his marriage, but remained a committed parent. It was masterful. It was also infuriating. When it came time for closing arguments, Robert stood and methodically dismantled Michael's case. "Your Honor, my client has provided documentation of her extraordinary commitment to these children. She has not prevented contact. She has not poisoned minds. What she has done is file for divorce because her husband committed infidelity with a much younger woman from his workplace. That is not poor parenting. That is a marital failure. And it is not grounds to remove children from the care of a devoted mother." Judge Hutchins took off her reading glasses and rubbed her eyes. "I'm going to take a brief recess to consider my ruling," she said. "We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes were the longest of my life. Robert assured me that we had a strong case. Catherine held my hand. My mother, who'd come to sit in the gallery, squeezed my shoulder. When Judge Hutchins returned, she looked directly at me. "I find that Mrs. Patterson is a fit and capable parent. There is no evidence of alienation or misuse of the children as weapons in the divorce proceedings. In fact, the evidence suggests that Mrs. Patterson has gone to considerable lengths to maintain the children's relationship with their father, despite the personal hurt she's experienced. The motion for temporary custody is denied. Mrs. Patterson will retain primary custody of both children pending the final divorce decree. Mr. Patterson will have visitation rights to be determined at a later date. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like victory. I didn't cry until we were outside the courthouse. Then I completely fell apart. Catherine and my mother held me as I sobbed, years of stress and fear and heartbreak pouring out of me all at once. I had won. I had actually won. But the victory felt hollow because it meant that Michael was never going to get his family back. It meant that Emma and Tyler would grow up with a part-time father. It meant that the life we'd built together, the one I'd thought was permanent and solid, was genuinely, irreversibly over. The final divorce was finalized 6 months later. I received $950,000 in the division of marital assets, plus $2,000 per month in child support for each child until they turned 18. Michael was ordered to pay for half of all health care, education, and extracurricular expenses. I retained primary custody, with Michael receiving visitation rights every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer. On paper, it looked like I'd won everything. In reality, I'd lost my marriage, my sense of security, and my belief in the person I'd thought I'd married. The house sold for $1.3 million, 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I took my half of the proceeds and bought a smaller home in a different neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a nice yard, far enough away from Riverside Estates that I wouldn't run into Michael or Jennifer at the grocery store. It was a fresh start, or as close to one as I could manage. Jennifer was fired from Henderson and Associates 3 months after Michael and I separated. Apparently, the partnership didn't appreciate the scandal of their newest partner having an affair with his office assistant. Michael kept his job, but his reputation took a hit. He was no longer the golden boy. He was the guy who'd blown up his marriage for a younger woman. I didn't feel satisfied by his downfall. If anything, it made me sad, because it meant that we'd both lost something irreplaceable. And for what? For a few months of passion with someone who didn't really know him? For the temporary excitement of something forbidden? Emma asked me once, about a year after the divorce, if I still loved her father. "I love who I thought he was," I told her honestly. "But people aren't always who we think they are." "Does that mean you're going to stop trusting people?" she asked. "No. It means I'm going to be more careful about who I trust. There's a difference." I thought about that closet a lot over the following years, about how close I'd come to never knowing the truth, about how I could have spent the rest of my marriage living in a lie, thinking that everything was fine while my husband was betraying me. The worst part wasn't the infidelity. It was the realization that I'd had suspicions all along, and I'd chosen to ignore them. I'd hired a private investigator, gotten a clean report, and then decided that meant everything was fine. I'd made the choice not to dig deeper, not to trust my gut, not to insist on transparency. That was the real lesson. Not that men cheat, though some do. Not that marriage is fragile, though it can be. But that we often know things on some level before we're ready to consciously acknowledge them. And sometimes, we ignore those warnings because the alternative, facing the truth, feels too painful to bear. 2 years after the divorce, I ran into Michael at the grocery store. He was with his new girlfriend, not Jennifer, someone else entirely. A blonde woman who looked vaguely like me, actually, which made me laugh in a bitter sort of way. He saw me, and I saw the flash of shame cross his face. He quickly turned his cart and went down a different aisle. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel much of anything except a kind of weary recognition that he was still the same man who'd hidden his unhappiness instead of talking to me about it. Still the same man who'd chosen an affair over an honest conversation. Still the same man who'd hurt 2 innocent children because he couldn't manage his own emotions like an adult. And I was no longer the woman who would have accepted that. No longer the woman who would have blamed herself for his choices. No longer the woman who would have hidden in a closet instead of demanding answers. That woman had disappeared the moment I opened that closet door, and I had no desire to find her again. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is the best thing that could have happened. You just don't realize it until much later, when you're standing in your own home, not the house you shared with him, but a place that's truly yours, and you realize that you're actually okay, that your children are okay, that you're stronger than you ever thought possible. The surprise party never happened, but what happened instead was a kind of surprise of its own, the discovery that I could survive betrayal, that I could protect my children, that I could build a new life from the ashes of the old one. And that, I learned, was worth more than any party ever could have been.